I thought I had everything. A mansion in Beacon Hill, a wealthy husband, 2 beautiful stepchildren I'd raised as my own. Until the morning my white husband looked me dead in the eye and said 4 words that shattered my world. Don't touch my kids. 3 years of playing the perfect wife, 3 years of managing his life while losing myself, and he reminded me exactly where I stood, as an outsider in my own home. What he didn't know was that everything he relied on, every detail that kept his perfect life running, flowed through me. So I did something that would bring his entire world crashing down. I walked away in complete silence. And when the money stopped, when his carefully constructed life began to unravel, he came crawling back with words I never thought I'd hear from his lips. But sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't getting even. It's watching someone realize what they've lost when it's already too late. If you're watching this story unfold, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what happened next will shock you. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of our Beacon Hill home, casting long shadows across the marble floors I'd come to know by heart. At 5:30 a.m., the house was mine alone, quiet, peaceful, and filled with the kind of stillness that comes before the storm of daily life begins. I moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, my bare feet silent on the cold stone. The coffee maker hummed to life as I pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. Lucas liked his eggs scrambled with just a touch of cheese. Ava preferred hers over easy, the yolk still runny enough to dip her toast. Ethan drank his coffee black and strong, always in the blue mug his mother had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. 3 years. That's how long I'd been perfecting this routine, learning the small details that make a house feel like a home. 3 years since Ethan Caldwell had swept into my life with his easy smile and expensive suits, promising me a world I'd never imagined. I was 26 then, working as an administrative assistant at his company, content with my small apartment and simple life. He was the CEO's son, heir to a fortune built on real estate and old Boston money. We shouldn't have noticed each other, but somehow we did. Now, at 29, I stood in his kitchen. Our kitchen, I corrected myself, preparing breakfast for his children like I had every morning since we'd married. The routine was soothing, predictable. It made me feel useful, needed. You're up early again. I turned to find Ethan in the doorway, already dressed in his navy suit, checking his phone. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Even at 6 a.m, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Same time as always, I said softly, cracking another egg into the pan. Coffee's ready. He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, scrolling through emails. The merger meeting got moved to 10. I might be late tonight. Okay, I'll keep dinner warm. He nodded without looking up, then grabbed his briefcase from the counter. Thanks, Naomi. A quick kiss on my cheek, and he was gone. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed through the empty hallway. I stood there for a moment, spatula in hand, listening to his car pull out of the driveway. This was our morning routine, polite, efficient, distant. It hadn't always been this way. In the beginning, he used to linger over coffee, telling me about his day, asking about mine. We'd laugh over silly things, share quiet moments before the children woke up. But somewhere along the way, those moments had faded. Now our conversations felt more like business transactions, schedules to coordinate, tasks to complete, problems to solve. Naomi, Ava's voice drifted down from upstairs, sweet and demanding. At 6 years old, she had her father's confidence and her late mother's delicate features. She'd been just 3 when Ethan and I married, young enough to accept me as part of her world without question. Coming, sweetheart, I called back, turning off the stove. I found her in her bedroom, standing in her pajamas with tears in her eyes. I can't find my lucky socks. The purple ones with stars? She nodded, sniffling. I knelt beside her dresser and pulled them from the bottom drawer where they'd somehow migrated. Ava's face brightened as she hugged them to her chest. Thank you, Naomi. You always know where everything is. Something warm spread through my chest at her words. This was why I stayed, why I worked so hard to make this house run smoothly. For moments like these, when I felt truly needed, truly part of this family. Get dressed, baby. Breakfast is almost ready. I helped her pick out clothes, her favorite yellow dress and matching cardigan, then went to wake Lucas. At 8, he was harder to rouse, grumpy and resistant to morning routines. He looked so much like Ethan with his light brown hair and sharp jawline, but his personality was entirely his own, stubborn, independent, quick to anger. 5 more minutes, he mumbled into his pillow. Come on, Luke. You don't want to be late for school again. He rolled over and glared at me with sleepy eyes. You're not my mom. The words hit like a slap, sudden and sharp. I'd heard them before, usually when he was tired or frustrated, but they never stopped stinging. I know that, I said gently. But I'm here, and I care about you. That has to count for something. He studied my face for a moment, then sat up with a heavy sigh. Fine, but I'm not wearing that stupid polo shirt. Fair enough. Pick whatever you want. Downstairs, I set the table while the children ate. Ava chattered about her art class, excited about a painting she was working on. Lucas ate in sullen silence, still half asleep. This was normal for us. The easy conversation with Ava, the careful navigation around Lucas's moods. I packed their lunches, checked their backpacks, made sure they had everything they needed. Clara, our house manager, would arrive soon to handle the pickup and drop-off. It was one of the few tasks Ethan had hired help for, saying he didn't want to burden me with driving around the city. At the time, I'd thought it was considerate. Now I wondered if it was just another way to keep me separate from parts of his life. Naomi, can you help me with my shoes? Ava called from the front hall. I found her sitting on the marble bench, struggling with the laces on her sneakers. She was still learning to tie them herself, tongue poking out in concentration as she worked. Here, let me show you again. I knelt beside her, guiding her small fingers through the motions. Loop, around and through. See? I think I've got it. She beamed at me, proud of her accomplishment. Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair still messy from sleep. He was wearing jeans and a rumpled t-shirt instead of his usual school clothes, but I didn't say anything. Pick your battles. That was my motto with him. Lucas, honey, can you come down? Clara will be here any minute. He made his way down slowly, dragging his feet on each step. When he reached the bottom, he dropped his backpack with a loud thud and slumped against the wall. I don't want to go to school today. I know the feeling, I said with a small smile. But you've got that science test you've been studying for. Remember? You're going to do great. He shrugged, unconvinced. Whatever. I was about to respond when I heard Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. He must have forgotten something, keys or his wallet or another phone charger. It happened more often lately, this scattered feeling that seemed to follow him around. Ethan? I called. Did you forget? Where are my good cufflinks? He interrupted, appearing in the doorway looking frazzled. The gold ones my father gave me. Top drawer of your dresser, left side, I said automatically, in the small jewelry box. He looked surprised, as if he'd expected to have to search for them. Right, thanks. Lucas chose that moment to have a complete meltdown. I hate these shoes, he shouted, kicking at the wall. They're stupid and ugly, and I'm not wearing them. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Ava flinched and moved closer to me, seeking comfort in the sudden tension. I took a deep breath and approached Lucas carefully, the way I'd learned to do over 3 years of morning battles. Hey. I said softly, crouching down to his level. What's really bothering you? Is it the test? Or something else? I don't want to talk about it, he snapped. But his voice was shaking now, more upset than angry. Okay, that's okay. But you still need to get ready for school. How about we compromise? You can wear your sneakers instead of the dress shoes. Luke. Ethan's voice cut through our conversation like a blade. What's all this noise about? I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, irritation written across his features. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. The morning rush was getting to him, and Lucas's outburst was the last thing he wanted to deal with. He's just having a tough morning, I said quickly, trying to diffuse the situation. We're working it out. No, we're not working it out. Ethan stepped closer, his presence filling the space between us. Lucas, you're 8 years old. This tantrum behavior is completely unacceptable. Ethan, I started, standing up slowly. He's just... Don't. His voice was sharp, cutting me off mid-sentence. Don't touch my kids. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as they sank in. Don't touch my kids. Not our children. Not the kids we were raising together. His kids. Ava's small hand found mine, but I barely felt it. Lucas had gone completely still, sensing the shift in the room even if he didn't understand it. Ethan was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, distant, like I was a stranger who had overstepped a boundary. I couldn't finish the sentence. My throat felt tight, my chest hollow. Clara's here, Ethan announced, as if nothing had happened. Kids, get your things. You're going to be late. He moved past me without another glance, helping Ava with her backpack while Lucas gathered his belongings in stunned silence. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching him take over the routine I'd perfected, the morning ritual that had been mine for 3 years. Clara appeared in the doorway, efficient and professional as always. Good morning, everyone. Ready to go? The children filed out behind her, Ava throwing me a confused look over her shoulder. Lucas didn't look back at all, and then they were gone, leaving me alone in the sudden quiet of the empty house. Ethan reappeared a few minutes later, straightening his tie as he headed for the door. He moved past me again, reaching for his car keys from the hall table. Ethan, wait. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and uncertain. What you said. I was handling the situation, he said without stopping. Lucas needs boundaries, structure. He can't just act out whenever he feels like it. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I followed him toward the door, my heart pounding. You said don't touch my kids. Like I'm not. Like we're not. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't turn around. It was just instinct, Naomi. Don't read too much into it. Just instinct. The words echoed in my head as I watched him leave, his car disappearing down the tree-lined street. Just instinct to think of them as his children and me as an outsider. Just instinct to draw that line in the sand, to remind me of my place. I walked slowly back to the kitchen, where our breakfast dishes still sat on the table. The eggs had gone cold, the coffee bitter. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes ago, but something fundamental had shifted. I sat down heavily in my chair and stared at the empty plates, replaying the moment over and over. The way he'd said it, the certainty in his voice, the way he'd looked at me afterward, like I was a paid employee who had forgotten her role. Don't touch my kids. I'd been living in this house for 3 years, loving these children, caring for them, worrying about them in the middle of the night when they had bad dreams or fevers. I'd helped Lucas with his homework, taught him to ride his bike, held him when he cried about missing his mother. I'd braided Ava's hair, read her bedtime stories, celebrated every small milestone and achievement. But in Ethan's mind, apparently, I was still just the woman he'd married, not their stepmother, not part of their family, just Naomi, who happened to live in their house. The silence of the empty kitchen pressed down on me. I thought about all the mornings I'd spent here, all the carefully prepared meals, the perfectly organized schedules, the endless small acts of love and service that kept this household running. I thought about how invisible I felt most of the time, how grateful I was for any acknowledgement of my efforts. I thought about how long it had been since Ethan and I had really talked, really connected as husband and wife instead of co-managers of a busy household. When was the last time he'd asked about my day, my thoughts, my feelings? When was the last time I'd felt like his partner instead of his employee? The house felt enormous around me, all marble and glass and expensive furniture that never quite felt like mine. I could afford none of it on my own. Before Ethan, I'd lived in a cramped studio apartment with hand-me-down furniture and a kitchen the size of a closet. This life was beautiful, comfortable, secure, everything I'd thought I wanted. But sitting there in the morning light, surrounded by luxury and silence, I wondered if I'd traded too much for it, if I'd lost myself somewhere in the process of trying to become the wife and mother this family needed. Don't touch my kids. I stood up slowly and began clearing the table, my movements automatic and precise. As I scraped the untouched food into the garbage disposal and loaded the dishwasher, I tried to push the words out of my mind, tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that Ethan was just stressed, just speaking without thinking. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I knew that those 4 words had revealed something he'd been thinking for a long time, something that had been building behind his polite smiles and distant kisses, something that made me realize how alone I really was in this beautiful, empty house. The disposal churned loudly as it swallowed the remnants of our family breakfast, and I wondered if it was too late to find my way back to the person I used to be. The person who had her own life, her own dreams, her own sense of worth that didn't depend on how well she could manage someone else's household. I wiped down the counters until they gleamed, organized the spice rack, folded the dish towels into perfect squares. Everything had to be perfect. Everything always had to be perfect. But as I worked, Ethan's words played on repeat in my mind, and I began to realize that no amount of perfection would ever make me feel like I belonged here. No amount of service would ever earn me the place in this family that I'd thought marriage would automatically provide. Don't touch my kids. For the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to wonder what would happen if I stopped trying so hard, if I stopped pretending that this beautiful life was enough to fill the growing emptiness inside me, if I stopped accepting crumbs of affection and started demanding the respect I deserved. The thought was terrifying and liberating all at once. And as I stood in the spotless kitchen of our perfect home, I realized that something had broken this morning that might never be repaired. Clara returned an hour later, her heels clicking against the marble as she made her way to the kitchen. She was a woman in her early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of efficiency that comes from years of managing wealthy households. "The children are settled at school," she announced, pulling out her tablet to review the day's schedule. Lucas seemed a bit quieter than usual. "Everything all right?" I was wiping down counters that were already spotless, needing something to do with my hands. "Just one of those mornings." Clara nodded knowingly. She'd been with the Caldwell family for 5 years, since before Ethan and I married. She'd seen the dynamics shift and change, though we'd never spoken about it directly. "Mrs. Caldwell, I wanted to go over this week's appointments," she continued. "The grocery delivery needs someone to sign for it on Thursday. The housekeeper will be here for the deep clean on Friday. And there's that charity luncheon on Saturday that Mr. Caldwell mentioned." I paused in my cleaning. "He mentioned a luncheon?" "Last week. He said you'd both be attending." Clara looked up from her tablet, sensing my confusion. "The Children's Hospital fundraiser. Mrs. Margaret Caldwell is hosting? Of course. Margaret, Ethan's mother, with her perfectly planned social events and her subtle reminders that I didn't quite fit into her world. She'd never been openly hostile, but there was always something in her tone. Something in the way she looked at me that made it clear I wasn't what she'd envisioned for her son. Right, I said quietly. I must have forgotten. Clara made a note on her tablet. Should I confirm your attendance? I'll talk to Ethan about it first. After Clara left to run errands, I found myself alone again in the vast house. The silence felt different now, heavier somehow. I wandered from room to room, seeing everything with new eyes. The living room with its cream-colored sofas and expensive artwork, none of which I'd chosen. The formal dining room where we hosted dinner parties for Ethan's colleagues, where I smiled and made polite conversation while feeling like I was playing a role I'd never quite mastered. The study lined with law books and family photos that told the story of the Caldwell legacy, a story that began long before I arrived and would continue long after I was gone. In the family room, I paused at the piano where sheet music sat open to a piece Ava had been learning. I ran my fingers over the keys, picking out a simple melody I remembered from childhood. The sound echoed strangely in the empty space. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Renee. Coffee later. I have news. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Can't today. Maybe this weekend? Renee and I had been friends since college, but our lives had grown so different since my marriage. She was single, working as a graphic designer, living in a small apartment in Cambridge that was cramped but cheerful and entirely her own. I'd tried to maintain our friendship, but it became harder as my world narrowed to this house. These routines, this carefully constructed life that left little room for spontaneity. The afternoon passed slowly. I organized closets that were already organized, planned meals for the week, responded to emails about household matters. When 3:30 arrived, I positioned myself by the front window to watch for the children's return. They burst through the door like a small tornado, backpacks flying, voices overlapping as they told me about their day. Ava had painted a picture of our house that she was excited to show me. Lucas had gotten an A on his science test, though he tried to act like he didn't care. Naomi, look! Ava thrust her painting toward me, her face glowing with pride. It's our family. The picture showed a house remarkably similar to ours, with 4 stick figures standing in front. A tall man with yellow hair, a smaller man with brown hair, a little girl with pigtails, and a woman with dark skin and black hair standing slightly apart from the others. My breath caught in my throat. Even a 6-year-old could see it. The distance, the separation, the way I existed on the periphery of this family unit. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I managed, my voice barely steady. You're such a talented artist. I want to put it on the refrigerator, Ava announced. Of course. Let's find the perfect spot. As I helped her tape the drawing to the refrigerator door, I caught sight of my reflection in the stainless steel surface. I looked tired, older than my 29 years. When was the last time I'd done something just for me? When was the last time I'd felt excited about anything? Lucas had disappeared upstairs, probably to his room to decompress from the day. He'd always been more introverted than his sister, needing space to process his emotions. I'd learned not to push, to let him come to me when he was ready. But today felt different. Today I wondered if he'd ever really come to me at all, or if I'd been fooling myself about our relationship. The morning's events had thrown everything into sharp relief, making me question every interaction, every small moment of connection I'd thought we'd shared. Ava settled at the kitchen table with her coloring books while I started preparing dinner. The familiar routine should have been comforting, but instead it felt mechanical, empty. I moved through the motions of chopping vegetables and seasoning meat, but my mind kept drifting back to Ethan's words. Don't touch my kids. Had I been overstepping all this time? Had I misunderstood my role in their lives? I thought about all the times I'd comforted them, disciplined them, loved them as if they were my own. Had they seen it as intrusion rather than care? Naomi? Ava's small voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. Are you sad? I looked down to find her studying my face with the intensity only children possess. Her blue eyes, so much like her father's, were filled with concern. I'm just thinking, baby. Nothing for you to worry about. Daddy was angry this morning. Was it because of Lucas? The innocence in her question made my chest tight. Children saw everything, understood more than we gave them credit for. She'd witnessed the tension, felt the shift in the room's energy, even if she couldn't name it. Sometimes grown-ups have difficult conversations, I said carefully. But it's not your fault, and it's not Lucas's fault either. She nodded solemnly and returned to her coloring, but I could feel her watching me from the corner of her eye. Children had an instinct for emotional weather, and mine was stormy today. At 6 o'clock, Ethan's key turned in the front door. I heard him drop his briefcase, the sound of his footsteps as he made his way toward the kitchen. My shoulders tensed involuntarily. Daddy! Ava launched herself from her chair and ran to him, her earlier concerns forgotten in the joy of his return. Hey there, princess. He scooped her up, spinning her around until she giggled. Did you have a good day at school? I painted a picture of our family. Naomi put it on the refrigerator. Ethan's eyes found mine over Ava's head, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. I searched his face for any sign of remorse, any acknowledgement of what had happened this morning, but his expression was unreadable, carefully neutral. I'd love to see it, he said to Ava, setting her down gently. She dragged him to the refrigerator, chattering excitedly about colors and techniques. I watched them together, noting how natural and easy their interaction was. There was genuine love there, genuine connection. It made his words from this morning even more painful, not because he didn't love his children, but because he loved them exclusively, separately from me. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, I said quietly. Thanks. He glanced at me briefly, then turned his attention back to Ava's artwork. This is really impressive, sweetheart. You're getting better every day. Lucas appeared at the bottom of the stairs, drawn by the sound of his father's voice. Dad, how was your meeting? It went well. How was the science test? I got an A. Lucas tried to sound casual, but I could see the pride in his posture, the way he stood a little straighter. That's my boy. Ethan ruffled his hair affectionately. I knew all that studying would pay off. I felt like an observer watching a family scene through glass. They were connecting, bonding, sharing their day, and I was the outsider preparing their meal in the background. The realization hit me with surprising force. This was what Ethan had meant this morning. This was how he saw our family structure, him and his children, with me in a supporting role. During dinner, the conversation flowed around me. Ethan asked about school projects and weekend plans. The children told stories about their friends and teachers. I contributed when directly addressed, but mostly I listened, noticing things I'd somehow missed before. The way Ethan's face lit up when Lucas laughed, the way he gave Ava his full attention when she spoke, no matter how trivial her story might seem. The way the three of them shared inside jokes and references to things that had happened before I entered their lives. I'd always known I was coming into an established family unit, but I'd assumed that over time, the boundaries would blur, that I'd find my own place within their dynamic. Instead, I'd remained perpetually on the outside, grateful for any inclusion, any acknowledgement of my presence. After dinner, we moved to the family room for what Ethan called homework hour. He helped Lucas with math problems while I sat with Ava as she practiced reading. It should have been a peaceful family scene, but the morning's tension hung over everything like a cloud. When 8 o'clock came and it was time for the children to get ready for bed, I stood to help with the nighttime routine. "I've got it," Ethan said quickly, his voice carefully neutral. I sat back down, stung. "I always help with bedtime." "I know, but I don't get to spend enough time with them during the week. I'd like to handle it tonight." The excuse was reasonable, loving even, but combined with his words from this morning, it felt like another boundary being drawn, another reminder of my outsider status. I watched them go upstairs together, listening to the sounds of running water and muffled voices. Ava's laughter drifted down from the second floor, followed by Lucas's protests about brushing his teeth. Normal family sounds that I was suddenly excluded from. I cleaned up the kitchen with mechanical precision, my movements sharp and efficient. Every dish was washed, every surface wiped down, every item returned to its proper place. The kitchen gleamed under the recessed lighting, perfect and sterile and empty. When Ethan came back downstairs an hour later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at nothing. "They're both asleep," he announced, pouring himself a glass of wine from the bottle we kept on the counter. I nodded but didn't respond. What was there to say? Thank you for allowing me to live in the same house as your children. Thank you for the privilege of cooking their meals and washing their clothes while being reminded that I'm not really part of their family. Naomi. He sat down across from me, his wineglass catching the light. "About this morning." "You already explained," I said quietly. "It was instinct." "Right." He took a sip of wine, seeming relieved that I wasn't going to make this difficult. "I'm glad you understand." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how 3 years of marriage, 3 years of shared life and responsibility and love, could be dismissed as instinct. I didn't understand how he could look at me across this table every night and not see a partner, a co-parent, a woman who'd given up her own life to help build his. "Margaret called," he said, changing the subject. "About Saturday's luncheon. She's excited that you'll be there. Another obligation, another performance." I thought about sitting at Margaret's perfectly set table, making polite conversation with women who'd known each other for decades, trying to find my place in conversations about schools I'd never attended and people I'd never met. "Actually," I said slowly, "I might not be able to make it." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Why not? You never miss Margaret's events." "Because I'm tired of pretending," I wanted to say. "Because I'm tired of being the token black wife at your mother's charity luncheons. Because I'm tired of smiling while being reminded that I don't belong. I just have other things to do," I said instead. "Like what?" The question hung between us, and I realized I had no answer. What did I have to do? What life existed outside of this house? These routines? These responsibilities I'd taken on without question? "I don't know yet," I admitted. He studied my face for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been concern, but it passed quickly, replaced by the familiar distance. "Well, think about it. Margaret's put a lot of effort into this event." Of course, Margaret's effort was what mattered, not my comfort or feelings or sense of belonging. I nodded and finished my tea in silence. Later, lying in bed beside my husband, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his steady breathing. The space between us felt vast despite the shared mattress. When was the last time we'd really talked? When was the last time he'd asked about my day, my thoughts, my dreams for the future? I couldn't remember. In the darkness, I allowed myself to imagine what would happen if I simply left. If I packed a bag and walked out of this beautiful house with its marble floors and designer furniture and perfect family that didn't really include me. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. I turned onto my side, studying Ethan's profile in the moonlight streaming through our bedroom windows. He was handsome, successful, a good father to his children. On paper, he was everything a woman could want in a husband. But as I watched him sleep, I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a woman and become a function. The woman who managed his household, cared for his children, and attended his mother's events. The woman who asked for nothing and expected less. Don't touch my kids. The words echoed in my mind as I finally drifted off to sleep, and I dreamed of a life where I mattered, where I was seen, where I was more than the sum of my domestic services. I dreamed of being free. I woke up before the alarm, the way I had every morning for 3 years, but something was different this time. The routine that usually gave me purpose felt hollow now, like going through the motions of a life that wasn't really mine. Ethan was already in the shower when I slipped out of bed. I could hear the water running, could picture him going through his own morning ritual of expensive shampoo and imported soap. Everything in our bathroom was the best money could buy, but none of it was chosen by me. I made my way downstairs and started the coffee, but my movements felt disconnected, like I was watching someone else's hands perform familiar tasks. The kitchen that had been my domain for 3 years suddenly felt foreign, unwelcoming. As I cracked eggs into the pan, I found myself thinking about my old apartment. It had been tiny, cramped, with a kitchen barely big enough for one person. But it had been mine. Every mismatched dish, every secondhand piece of furniture, every photo on the wall, all of it chosen by me, reflecting who I was rather than who someone else wanted me to be. "Morning," Ethan said, appearing in the doorway already dressed for another important day. He grabbed his usual blue mug and poured coffee, checking his phone while he drank. "Morning," I replied automatically. We moved around each other like polite strangers, the kitchen suddenly feeling too small despite its generous size. He buttered toast while I finished the eggs. I packed the children's lunches while he reviewed emails. We performed our dance of domestic efficiency without really seeing each other. When the children came down for breakfast, I noticed things I'd somehow missed before. The way Lucas automatically turned to his father when he had a question about school. The way Ava climbed onto Ethan's lap instead of mine while he read the morning headlines on his tablet. Small things, but they painted a clear picture of where I stood in this family hierarchy. "Dad, can Tommy come over after school?" Lucas asked, focused entirely on Ethan, despite the fact that I was usually the one who handled playdates and scheduling. "Ask Naomi," Ethan said without looking up from his screen. "She manages your social calendar." I felt a familiar sting at being reduced to a manager, a coordinator of other people's lives rather than a participant in them. But I forced a smile for Lucas's benefit. "Tommy can come over," I said. "I'll call his mom after you leave for school." Lucas nodded and went back to his cereal. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the effort it would take to rearrange my afternoon. Why should there be? In his 8-year-old mind, managing his life was simply what I did, the same way the dishwasher washed dishes, or the car started when you turned the key. After Ethan left for work and Clara arrived to take the children to school, I found myself standing in the front hallway, listening to the silence settle around me like dust. The house felt enormous and empty, full of beautiful things that meant nothing to me. I walked upstairs to our bedroom and stood in front of my closet, looking at clothes I'd bought to fit into Ethan's world. Expensive dresses for charity events, designer suits for business dinners, shoes that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Everything carefully chosen to help me play the role of the successful CEO's wife. But where were my clothes? Where was the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Caldwell? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Renee's contact. My finger hovered over her number for a long moment before I finally pressed call. "Naomi." Her voice was bright, excited. "I was just thinking about you. Are you free for that coffee today?" The question was simple, but it hit me with unexpected force. Was I free? When was the last time I'd made a plan that wasn't centered around someone else's needs? "Actually," I said slowly, "yes, I am. We met at a small cafe in Cambridge, the kind of place I used to frequent before my life became consumed with charity luncheons and school events. Renee was already there when I arrived, her laptop open, working on a design project with her usual passionate focus. She looked up when I approached, and her face broke into a grin. "There's my mysterious friend. I feel like I haven't really talked to you in months." I slid into the chair across from her, struck by how comfortable she looked in her own skin. Her hair was natural, her makeup minimal, her clothes chosen for comfort rather than impression. She was simply, authentically herself in a way I'd forgotten how to be. "I know. I'm sorry. Life has been complicated," Renee finished when I trailed off. "Honey, you look exhausted. What's going on?" The concern in her voice almost broke me. When was the last time someone had asked about my well-being without it being connected to how well I was managing everyone else's lives? "Ethan said something yesterday," I began, then stopped. How could I explain the weight of 4 words? How could I make her understand the way they'd crystallized years of feeling invisible? "What did he say?" "It doesn't matter," I said quickly. "It's just, do you ever feel like you've lost yourself?" Renee closed her laptop and gave me her full attention. "Oh, sweetheart. What happened?" And suddenly, sitting in that familiar cafe surrounded by the buzz of normal people living normal lives, the whole story came pouring out. The morning argument, Ethan's dismissive words, the way I'd felt like a stranger in my own home. The loneliness, the emptiness, the growing realization that I'd traded my identity for security and belonging that turned out to be an illusion. Renee listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each detail I shared. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Naomi," she said gently, "do you remember who you were before you married Ethan?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You were amazing. You were funny and independent and so full of dreams. You were going to take night classes, remember? You wanted to get your degree in social work, help kids in the system. You had plans, goals, a whole life mapped out." I stared at her, memories flooding back like water through a broken dam. Night school, social work, dreams I'd put on hold when Ethan entered my life, telling myself they could wait, that building a family was more important. "You were never meant to be someone's supporting character," Renee continued. "You were the heroine of your own story." "That feels like a lifetime ago," I whispered. "It doesn't have to be. You're 29 years old, Naomi. You have so much life ahead of you, so much potential you've been ignoring." I thought about my morning routine, my careful management of other people's schedules and needs. I thought about how grateful I felt when someone noticed my efforts, how I'd learned to find validation in being useful rather than being valued. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I admitted. "Then maybe it's time to find out." We talked for 2 hours, the longest conversation I'd had about myself in years. Renee told me about her work, her recent breakup, her plans to travel to Europe next spring. She was building a life that belonged entirely to her, making choices based on her own desires rather than someone else's expectations. "You could come with me," she said suddenly. "To Europe. Take some time, figure things out." The suggestion was absurd, impossible. I had responsibilities, obligations, a life that depended on me being present and available. But for just a moment I let myself imagine it, waking up in a different city every few days, making decisions based on my own curiosity rather than someone else's schedule. "I couldn't," I said, but even as I said it, I wondered why not. "Why? Because Ethan needs you to manage his household? Because the kids can't survive without you organizing their play dates? Naomi, they managed perfectly well before you came along. They'll figure it out if you need some space." Her words stung because they were true. I wasn't indispensable. I was convenient. a wife-shaped solution to the problem of Ethan's busy life and motherless children. When I got home that afternoon, I found myself looking at everything with fresh eyes. The perfectly arranged flowers that I refreshed weekly, the spotless kitchen that I maintained, the organized calendars and color-coded schedules that kept the Caldwell family running smoothly. All of it would continue without me. Ethan had money to hire help, to solve problems, to maintain the life he wanted. He'd done it before our marriage, and he could do it again. The children came home from school full of energy and stories. Tommy had indeed come over for a playdate, and I'd arranged snacks and activities, mediated minor disputes, and ensured everyone had fun. It was the kind of thing I did automatically, without thinking about the emotional labor involved. But as I watched Lucas and Tommy play video games, I noticed that they barely acknowledged my presence. I was background noise, the adult who provided juice boxes and made sure they didn't kill each other. Useful, but not essential. Certainly not irreplaceable. At dinner, Ethan was distracted, fielding work calls between courses. The children chatted about their day while I served and cleared plates, playing my familiar role as facilitator of other people's lives. "How was your coffee with Renee?" Ethan asked absently during a lull in conversation. I was surprised he'd remembered. "It was good. Really good." "That's nice." He was already reaching for his phone, scrolling through emails that couldn't wait until after dinner. That night, after the children were asleep and Ethan was in his study taking calls, I found myself in our walk-in closet again. This time, I pulled out a suitcase, not one of the expensive matching sets we used for family vacations, but an old black bag I'd had since college. I didn't pack it. I just held it, feeling its weight, remembering all the places it had been with me before my life became so carefully circumscribed. It had been to job interviews and weekend trips, and the apartment where I'd lived alone, and been perfectly happy with my own company. I set it on the floor of the closet and stared at it for a long time. Such a simple thing, a piece of luggage. But it represented possibility, movement, the radical idea that I could choose a different path. The next morning followed the same pattern as always. Breakfast, school preparation, Ethan's efficient departure for work. But as I watched Clara drive away with the children, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, retrieved the suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. Not everything. Just enough clothes for a few days, my laptop, my phone charger, and a small jewelry box that had been my grandmother's. The only thing in this house that was truly mine. I moved carefully, quietly, as if making too much noise might wake me from this dream of autonomy. Each item I placed in the suitcase felt like a small act of rebellion, a reclamation of space that belonged to me alone. When the bag was full, I zipped it closed and set it by the bedroom door. Then I went to Ethan's desk in the study and found a piece of his expensive stationery. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I wrote, "I won't stay where I'm not family. Naomi." Short, simple, honest. No blame, no accusations, just a statement of fact. I folded the note and placed it on his pillow where he'd find it when he came home from work. I called a taxi, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out of the Caldwell mansion for the last time. As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I was done being a supporting character in someone else's story. It was time to write my own. The taxi pulled up to Renee's apartment building in Cambridge, and I sat in the back seat for a moment, my suitcase beside me, trying to process what I'd just done. 3 years of my life, 3 years of carefully constructed routines and relationships, reduced to a single black bag and a note on expensive stationery. My hands were shaking as I paid the driver. Renee's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone, the kind of building where the stairs creaked and the radiator made noise, but the rent was reasonable and the neighborhood had character. I'd been here countless times over the years, but today it felt like arriving at a foreign country after a long exile. She opened the door before I could knock. her face immediately shifting from surprise to concern when she saw my suitcase. "Naomi, what's going on?" "I left," I said simply. The words felt strange in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd forgotten how to use. She pulled me inside without another word, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like her familiar lavender perfume and the coffee she drank all day while working. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. "Tell me everything," she said, leading me to her small couch. So I did. I told her about the morning routine that had felt like sleepwalking, about the way I'd looked at my closet full of clothes chosen for someone else's life, about the moment I'd realized that I could simply choose to leave. "I wrote him a note," I said, still amazed at my own boldness. "I actually walked out." "Good for you." Renee's voice was fierce, proud. "What did the note say?" "That I won't stay where I'm not family." She nodded approvingly. "Perfect. No room for misinterpretation there." "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "I don't have a job. I don't have my own place anymore. All my money is in our joint account, and I can't even access most of it without his signature for large withdrawals." "You'll figure it out," Renee said, with the confidence I wished I felt. "You can stay here as long as you need. The couch pulls out, and I work from home, so we can keep each other company." The relief I felt was overwhelming. For 3 years, I'd been surrounded by luxury, but starved for genuine human connection. Sitting in Renee's cluttered, comfortable living room, I remembered what it felt like to be seen and valued simply for existing. My phone buzzed with a text message. Ethan's name appeared on the screen, and my heart rate immediately spiked. "Call me. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, then showed it to Renee. "You don't have to answer," she said gently. "Not until you're ready." I turned my phone face down on the coffee table. I'm not ready. That evening, Renee and I ordered Chinese takeout and ate it straight from the containers while sitting on her living room floor. It was the kind of casual, comfortable meal I hadn't enjoyed in years. At the Caldwell house, even simple dinners were served on china with proper place settings and careful conversation. "Remember in college when we used to do this every Friday?" Renee asked, laughing at the sauce I'd dripped on my shirt. "You always insisted on using chopsticks even though you were terrible at it." "I wasn't that bad," I protested, but I was laughing too. When was the last time I'd laughed like this? When was the last time I'd felt this light? My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the evening, text after text from Ethan, each one more urgent than the last. "Naomi, please call me. The kids are asking where you are. We can work this out. Come home. Let's talk about this reasonably." I read each message but didn't respond. For the first time in 3 years, someone else would have to figure out dinner, homework supervision, and bedtime routines. Someone else would have to manage the household logistics that had consumed my days and defined my worth. "He's panicking," Renee observed, reading the messages over my shoulder. "Good," I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "Let him panic. Let him realize what it takes to keep his life running smoothly." That night, lying on Renee's pull-out couch in a borrowed pair of pajamas, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of a different life. Traffic on the street below, neighbors moving around in the apartments above and beside us, the hum of a refrigerator that was older than my relationship with Ethan. It should have felt wrong, sleeping in a strange bed, surrounded by uncertainty. Instead, it felt like waking up from a long dream. The next morning, I woke up naturally instead of to an alarm. No breakfast to prepare, no schedules to coordinate, no one depending on me to make their day run smoothly. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Renee had already left for a client meeting, but she'd left coffee in the pot and a note saying to make myself at home. Such a simple gesture, but it meant everything. When was the last time someone had thought about my comfort without expecting something in return? I spent the morning looking at job listings online. remembering skills I'd let atrophy during my years as a full-time wife and stepmother. Administrative work, customer service, entry-level positions that would pay a fraction of what Ethan spent on wine each month, but would be mine, earned by my own efforts. My phone rang around 10. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, and this time I answered. "Thank God," he said, his voice tight with stress. "Naomi, where are you? We need to talk about this." "I'm somewhere safe," I said calmly. "That's all you need to know right now." "This is ridiculous. You can't just leave without discussing it. We're married." The word hung between us. Married. A legal contract, a social arrangement, but apparently not the partnership I'd thought it was. "You're right," I said. "We are married, which is why your words hurt so much." There was a pause. What I said was wrong. I know that. But you can't just disappear every time we have an argument. This wasn't an argument, Ethan. This was you telling me, very clearly, where I stand in your family. I'm finally listening. That's not... He stopped, seemed to gather himself. "Come home. Let's work this out like adults. I am working it out. I'm figuring out who I am when I'm not managing your life. The kids need you." The words were calculated, designed to hit where I was most vulnerable. For a moment I wavered. I thought about Ava's morning hugs, Lucas's rare smiles when I helped him with homework. "They need consistency and love," I said finally. "You can provide that. You did it before I came along." "Naomi..." I hung up before he could say more. My hands were shaking, but I felt stronger than I had in years. Over the next few days, I fell into a new routine. I applied for jobs, helped Renee with her design projects, and slowly remembered what it felt like to have thoughts and opinions that mattered. We took long walks through Cambridge, visited museums, sat in cafes and talked about books and movies and dreams for the future. I'd forgotten how much I loved to read, how much I enjoyed learning new things. At the Caldwell house, my free time had been filled with household management and social obligations. Here, with Renee, I remembered that I had interests beyond other people's schedules. Ethan called every day, sometimes multiple times. His messages evolved from frustrated to pleading to angry and back again. I could hear his desperation growing, could picture him struggling to maintain his perfectly ordered life without me there to manage the invisible details. "Clara quit," he told me during one particularly tense phone call. She said managing the household isn't in her job description. I almost laughed. Clara had been watching me handle those responsibilities for years. Of course, she didn't want to take them on herself. "You'll figure it out," I said, using his own words from countless conversations where he'd dismissed my concerns. "The kids are confused. They don't understand why you left." This one hit harder. I did miss them. Missed Ava's chatter about her art projects. Missed Lucas's occasional moments of vulnerability when he let me help him. But I also knew that my leaving might be the best thing I could do for them in the long run. They needed to see that relationships required mutual respect, that love without dignity wasn't really love at all. "Tell them I care about them very much," I said. "Tell them that sometimes adults need space to figure things out. They think you don't love them anymore." The manipulation was clumsy, but effective. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to rush back and comfort them, to fix the confusion I'd created. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you told me not to touch them." Silence stretched between us across the phone line. "I didn't mean it that way," he said finally. "Yes, you did. That's the problem." A week after I left, Renee convinced me to go out for drinks with some of her friends. I hadn't socialized outside of Ethan's circle in years, and I felt awkward at first, uncertain how to talk about myself without referencing my role as wife and stepmother. But as the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing, laughing, engaging in conversations about politics and art and travel plans that had nothing to do with school pickup schedules or charity events. "You seem different," said Maya, one of Renee's designer friends. "Lighter somehow." "I'm figuring out who I am again," I said, and realized it was true. On the way home, Renee and I walked through Harvard Square, past the bookstores and coffee shops that had been part of my world before Ethan. The night air was crisp, autumn settling over the city like a comfortable blanket. "You know what I realized tonight?" I said as we paused to look in a bookstore window. "I haven't talked about myself, really talked about what I think and feel and want, in 3 years. "That's not living," Renee said gently. "That's just existing." She was right. I'd been existing, maintaining, managing, but not living. Not growing, not exploring, not becoming the person I was meant to be. My phone buzzed with another message from Ethan. This one was different. "I'm coming to find you. We're going to settle this face to face." I showed the message to Renee and she frowned. "How would he find you?" "You haven't told him where you're staying." A chill ran through me as I realized the possibilities. Shared credit cards, location tracking on my phone, mutual friends he could pressure for information. I'd been so focused on the emotional freedom of leaving that I hadn't thought about the practical realities of staying hidden. "Maybe I should go back," I said, doubt creeping in. "Maybe I'm being dramatic, throwing away a good life because of one thoughtless comment." Renee stopped walking and turned to face me. "Naomi, listen to me. A good life doesn't make you feel invisible. A good marriage doesn't make you question your worth every day. What you had wasn't good. It was convenient. For him." Her words hit like a revelation. Convenient. That's exactly what I'd been. A convenient solution to the complications of Ethan's busy life and motherless children. Useful, efficient, grateful for the privilege of serving. "You're right," I said softly. "You're absolutely right." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I'd received 2 callbacks for job interviews, both for administrative positions at nonprofit organizations. The pay would be modest compared to what I'd had access to as Ethan's wife, but it would be mine. I was getting dressed for the first interview when Renee's doorbell rang. We looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. "Stay here," she said, moving toward the door. I heard voices in the hallway. Renee's firm tone and a familiar male voice that made my stomach clench. Ethan had found me. "I know she's here," I heard him say. "I just want to talk to her." "She doesn't want to see you," Renee replied. "You need to leave." "I'm not leaving without my wife." The possessiveness in his voice made something hot and angry flare up in my chest. His wife. His kids. His house. Everything and everyone defined in relation to him, as if we had no existence independent of his needs. I walked to the door and opened it before Renee could stop me. Ethan stood in the hallway looking haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man whose carefully controlled world was falling apart. "Naomi." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Thank God. We need to talk." "We're talking," I said, staying firmly behind the threshold of Renee's apartment. "Privately. This is between us. Nothing you need to say to me can't be said in front of Renee." He glanced at her with obvious irritation. I could see him struggling to maintain his composure, to find the right words to convince me to come back. "You look terrible," he said finally, as if my appearance might shame me into returning. I almost laughed. I was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, clothes I'd chosen for comfort rather than impression. My hair was natural instead of carefully styled, my makeup minimal. I looked like myself for the first time in years. "I look free," I said. The word seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed with anger. Free? You think this is freedom? Living in someone else's apartment, applying for entry-level jobs, throwing away everything we built together? We didn't build anything together, Ethan. You built a life, and I maintained it. There's a difference. That's not true. We're a partnership. Partners have equal say. Partners respect each other. Partners don't tell each other not to touch the children they've been raising for 3 years. He flinched at his own words thrown back at him. I apologized for that. No, you didn't. You said it was instinct, which somehow made it worse. We stared at each other across the threshold, 3 years of marriage reduced to this moment of painful honesty. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. The question caught me off guard. What did I want? For so long, I'd focused on what everyone else needed, what would make the household run smoothly, what would keep the peace. I want to matter, I said finally. I want to be seen as more than a convenient solution to your domestic needs. I want to be valued for who I am, not just what I can do for you. You do matter. You know you do. Then why haven't you asked me a single question about how I'm doing, about what I want or need or dream about? When was the last time you were curious about my thoughts, my feelings, my life outside of managing yours? The silence stretched between us, and I could see the exact moment when he realized he had no answer. He started, then stopped. I thought you were happy. You thought I was convenient, I corrected gently. There's a difference. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked truly defeated. So what now? You just walk away from everything. I'm not walking away from everything. I'm walking toward something better, toward a life where I matter, where I'm seen, where I'm valued as a person instead of a service provider. And the kids? You're walking away from them too? The question was designed to hurt, and it did. But I'd had time to think about this, to understand the difference between abandoning someone and removing yourself from a harmful situation. I love those children, I said quietly. But they need to see what healthy relationships look like. They need to understand that love requires respect, that marriage should be a partnership between equals. Right now, they're learning that one person's needs matter more than the other's, and that's not a lesson I want to reinforce. Ethan stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. I never thought. I didn't realize. I know. That's the problem. He stood there for another moment, seeming to struggle with something. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. I brought this, he said, holding it out to me. I thought maybe if I gave you access to your own money. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a letter from his lawyer dissolving our joint accounts and establishing separate ones in my name. It's half of everything in our savings, he said. I thought you should have your independence. The gesture was significant, but it also revealed how fundamentally he misunderstood the situation. He thought this was about money, about financial security. He still didn't see that it was about dignity, about being valued as a person, rather than a possession. Thank you, I said, meaning it. This will help. Will it bring you home? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the confident CEO I'd married, but a man who'd never learned to see beyond his own needs. A man who'd grown up with money and privilege, and the assumption that every problem could be solved with the right transaction. No, I said gently. This isn't about money, Ethan. This is about respect. This is about being seen and valued for who I am, not just what I can do for you. His face crumpled slightly, and I saw the exact moment when he realized that his usual solutions weren't going to work. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. That's the thing, I said softly. You can't fix it. You can only decide whether you want to understand it. I stepped back and started to close the door, then paused. Tell the children I love them, I said. Tell them that sometimes adults need time to figure out how to be better people. Tell them I hope they'll understand someday. I closed the door gently, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. Through the window, I watched him walk slowly to his car, his shoulders bent like a man carrying a weight he'd never noticed before. 3 months later, I was settled into my new job at a nonprofit that helped families navigate the foster care system. The work was challenging, meaningful, and reminded me every day why I'd wanted to go into social work in the first place. I'd found a small studio apartment in Somerville. Nothing fancy, but entirely my own. Every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall, every book on the shelf was chosen by me, reflecting my taste, my interests, my life. Ethan and I had spoken a few times about divorce proceedings, conversations that were civil but distant. He'd dropped the entitled anger and seemed genuinely confused by my unwillingness to return to our old life. I think he was beginning to understand, finally, that some things couldn't be fixed with money or apologies or promises to do better next time. I missed the children sometimes, but I'd sent them cards on their birthdays and holidays, letting them know I was thinking of them. Through mutual acquaintances, I'd heard that Ethan had hired a full-time nanny and was struggling to maintain the household standards I'd set. The kids were adjusting, learning new routines, discovering that life continued even when the supporting cast changed. On a crisp Saturday morning in December, I was walking through Harvard Square when I saw a familiar figure coming out of a bookstore. Ethan looked different, thinner, more tired, but also somehow more present. He saw me at the same moment, and we both froze. Naomi. He said my name quietly, like he wasn't sure I was real. Hello, Ethan. We stood there for a moment, taking each other in. I was wearing jeans and a warm coat, my hair natural, no makeup except lip balm. I looked like myself. Finally, completely myself. You look good, he said, happy. I am happy. I wanted to tell you, he said, his words coming out in a rush. I've been seeing someone, a therapist, trying to understand things. I felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. That's good. I'm glad. She's helping me see patterns, ways I learned to think about relationships that aren't healthy. I waited, not sure what he wanted me to say. I want you to know that I understand now, he continued, what you were trying to tell me, about being seen, about mattering. I didn't get it before, but I do now. I'm glad, I said, and meant it. Understanding is the first step. Is there? He paused, seemed to gather courage. Is there any chance we could try again? With what I've learned? The question I'd been expecting. The offer I'd thought about during long nights in my studio apartment. 6 months ago, it might have been enough. 6 months ago, I might have been willing to try again, to see if he could really change. But standing there in the cold December air, looking at this man who'd finally learned to see me, I realized that understanding wasn't the same as love. Growth wasn't the same as compatibility. And sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was to let them become better without you. No, I said gently, but I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you become the partner someone deserves. He nodded slowly, and I saw acceptance in his eyes rather than anger. Growth, maybe. The beginning of wisdom. I hope you're happy, he said. Really happy. I am, I said. Finally. We parted ways at the corner, walking in different directions toward different lives. As I made my way back to my apartment, I thought about the woman who had stood in that marble kitchen 9 months ago, desperate for acknowledgement, settling for crumbs of affection. She felt like a stranger now. I climbed the stairs to my small, bright apartment and made myself coffee in a mug I'd chosen because I liked the way it felt in my hands. I settled onto my secondhand couch with a book I was reading for pleasure, not improvement, and listened to the sounds of my neighbors living their own lives around me. My phone buzzed with a text from Renee. "Dinner tonight? I have wine and stories about my latest client disaster." I smiled and typed back, "Yes, come over around 7. Simple plans with a dear friend. A life built on small joys and authentic connections rather than impressive surfaces and careful performances. A life where I mattered not because of what I could do for someone else, but because of who I was when I was simply, completely myself." Some mornings, when I walked past the beautiful houses in Beacon Hill on my way to work, I thought about the woman who still lived behind those windows, managing someone else's life, grateful for any scraps of attention or affection. I thought about her, and I felt sorry for her, and I kept walking toward my own small, imperfect, entirely authentic life. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.